So I'm going to give you
Okay.
the floor. I'm going on
Okay.
mute. I suggest everybody go on mute.
Okay. Can you all see the Space Talks
I can,
picture?
yes.
Okay, so here we are. So I'm beginning this. This is the first in a series of Space Talks that we are going to start each meeting with from now on for the Sacramento L5 Society. As I mentioned, we love to popularize this to have everyone, every meeting, we can get to have an interesting talk at the beginning of it, which would allow us to help with recruitment, etc. So what I'd like to talk about today is the internet in 1915, the World Wide Web throughout the ages. So I'd like to show you how our information transfer has changed over the years. So we started out with something called scripto continua, and today we now have semantic search. So what we have now here is scripto continua. When they first invented writing and began to put it on papyrus, they didn't have any spaces between the words, and it was all capital letters. And this went on for almost 2,000 years before they realized that spaces between the words would likely help you to read it. So what I want to go through here is how we went from no spaces between the words, scripto continua, on up to our modern present day AI vector semantic search knowledge. So where did I get this idea? I got this idea from a tree in Brooklyn. It turns out that there's a wonderful book called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and it's about a 13-year-old girl in 1915 who's growing up in very poor Irish circumstances in Williamsburg area of Brooklyn. And she has a charming father, but he's a drunk. The mother takes care of the apartment building, so she gets enough money for the rent and food. And so her home is in a crowded tenement, and her need to help with the family means that she has to go to work at a very young age. But the thing is that she can read very, very fast. So in that time, information came from one brain to another via observation, via looking out the window. And then on the right, you'll see that there were vast collections of catalogs and papers that people climbed around. I don't know if you've ever seen ladders in a library, but that's the way it used to be. So what did Francie with her speed reading do? She became a central processing unit. It turns out that in those days, the web was taken care of by newspapers. And there were many people who had the job of reading dozens of newspapers each day and collecting the clips in folders and sending them out to subscribers. And there were services in 1915 with names like Romelike and Curtis, Durrance, and a Bureau of Newspaper Clippings. So they would sit, and Francie was great at this, by reading newspapers all day long and cataloging them based upon the subscribers she had and the topics they had of interest. So they would type out the envelopes, they would send it by mail. So information transfer in those days was by newspaper. So here you see on the left huge rolls of newsprint, and then you see teletypes there in the middle, and you see an editorial board from a newspaper. My father used to bring me to work. He was a teletype repairman, and that's where I first learned to use to punch out information and have it run through the machine and have the lovely little head make all the wonderful teletype noise and give information. So that was the internet, the human-powered search and delivery. So now we'll look at the first problem of reading. So here's what scripto continua looked like in the back in the days. There was no spaces between the words on the monuments, and it was in all caps. And when you read, you had to parse out the words and look at them. And this was the same in the books. And this lasted for almost 2,000 years. But then in the 7th century AD, the Anglo-Saxon monks began to add spaces to make it easier to read. So the words were visually separated. And the lines became meaning, not just puzzles of where are the words. And so as that happened and went through, they began to embellish. So they had clear word spacing and drop caps and margins, and nothing about the actual language changed, but the way we looked at it did. So now we can read it more easily. How are we going to find it? Well, that's where they started to come up with tables of contents, indexes, and once something that's a lost art, a synoptic table of contents. This was actually an excellent way, and you probably wish you'd had it in your textbooks, etc., once you see it. So here we have the ancient scrolls would just have tables of contents, finally. I mean, the ancient scrolls had nothing. The people just had to know where they are. So in the printing press era, after Gutenberg invented his movable type and made the printing press very much efficient, they began to put tables of contents in there so that you could actually see them. I don't actually have a slide for it, but the idea of a title page in the front of a book and the name of the book on the outside binding so you could see what it was off the shelf instead of just asking a monk where it was in the pile, that wasn't initially done either. The idea that you'd put the title of the book on the binding was a new idea as well about this time. So now they began to put in indexes, and it started with the Bible, concordances, where you could find topics and page numbers. And this is going on from on the 13th century up until the 18th century, the 1700s, they began to put indexes in the books so that you could actually open the book up and find information in it. And then this is the lost art, the synoptic table of contents. That would have a chapter title, but then below in word wrap, they would have the topics within the chapter and what page they were on. So this was not just the titles, but it was a summary of the content progression so you could understand what happened. And in a full circle, I wasn't able to find a synoptic table of contents that looked good on the web. So I just asked ChatGPT, and we worked up a ancient-looking synoptic table of contents. So we put that together. So that's showing how the thoughts and the knowledge now can actually become action. And so now we look at how we structure the knowledge. Okay, you can find out what's in the book, but how do you find the book you want? Well, they began with library catalogs, metadata for books, and everything was on the card catalog. I'm sure we're all old enough to remember the card catalog. And then how to classify this? Well, they began with the Dewey Decimal System, and that was in the late 1800s. It's a little surprising they didn't come up with it before that, because Linnaeus did his cataloging and categorization of the species in the early 1700s. So that's where you had to look for your information in the card catalog according to the Dewey Decimal System. And just as an aside, when the Library of Congress began to organize its system, it turned out that the Dewey Decimal System was too rigid and not extensible. So the Library of Congress actually built the LCC, the Library of Congress catalog system. And so now, once we have these catalog systems, how do we store the information? Well, they were stored in huge libraries with rows and rows of books. And as it's shown in there, the Dewey Decimal System helped categorize things into different topics so that you could actually think of a topic and go and find it. So now what we have is we move forward through history, just into the more of the modern age, we had this storage of huge amounts of card catalogs and huge physical amounts of paper. But then now in the recent years, we began to store all of that information in the cloud, in servers, represented by the machine room that you see in the cloud. So after that, we come back to Francie's livelihood. In the early 20th century, they would have these clipping services. And here's some pictures about how they would sit and organize and clip and look up their client folders and organize their topics. And then how do you get the information from the clipping service, the topic service, to the people? Well, it was physically transported. And notice the save time, get a mailbox. Do you have internet in the rural areas these days? It's like, hey, don't go to the post office. We'll deliver right to you. So they were advertising the fact that you need a mailbox. And then I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but you have pneumatic tubes, which take bundles of information and shoot them pneumatically throughout a building. In fact, when I was little, my mother lost me in the Gimbel's department store in New York City, in Jamaica, New York. And she couldn't find me. And then she finally did find me. And I was in this pneumatic tube room. And I told her, I was about 4 years old, and I told her that I saw these pipes and I just wanted to know where the pipes were going. And so after that, she used to tie a helium balloon to me so she'd be able to see me from a distance. And now we come to the modern shift. We start from going to these physical archives to databases. So again, in the 50s and the 60s, massive data entry began. A program used to weigh 5 pounds. Those were my first programs in the 60s on punch cards. And so the sorting and counting and querying started to come to scale, and they began to be that you could automate the retrieval. You didn't have to wander down the card catalog. You didn't have to ask somebody to do it. And then from 1979 on, we began to build the web. I don't know if anybody ever remembers the services like Usenet and Bulletin Board Services, Archie, CompuServe, Prodigy. Well, that began to connect the documents together. But they were login services. So what happened there was you had to log in, and they had a very restricted amount. You could still find things like the weather in Utah and things like that. But again, it was within, and it wasn't the super connectivity, but it was the start of the connection of information. And then they invented the browsers. Tim Berners-Lee just said, we need a simple browser representation that can look at it. And then this was the big trick, the hyperlink anchor. See also, when you click on one set of text in a document, it takes you to another document. And as it built larger and larger, those documents could be anywhere in the world. So what happened then was, how do you search what you want? What do you know what the word is supposed to mean? And so Google came up with the idea that it's important if a lot of people want to see it. So they began to rank things by their popularity. How many links go to a site? That site is more important. And then that was able to produce a web of meaning. And in the circle on the right, you can see that the web is extensive to way out to little known sites, but the main sites with the most interesting topics are now the most traveled, the most wanted. And so now we've got words. So he was finding words. So what happens after that? That happens with the semantic search. They began to build essentially clusters of synonyms. And this is where AI starts to come in and the large language models. They cluster all of these synonyms into maps that have like attractors within them and islands of meaning within them. And so they get very, very big, to the idea of billions and billions of nodes where the information will be stored. And there's almost a gravity between the information. So when you do an AI search, it's like you throw a glue ball through this multi-dimensional landscape, and it picks up the meaning behind it and drags it along back to you. And you can see some of the information that a mouse is an animal. It could be a pet, as a rat. And when you think of a mouse, you'll think of a rat. So that's the way they began to associate synonyms together and enabled you to put in one word, and yet it would link to all the other words that were synonymous with it. And then it would begin to aggregate them into meaning, into semantics. And so we've gone through the whole history of the world by accelerating cognition, because our idea is, I have an idea, I represent it in the world, and I'd like you to have that same idea. So over the years, we find that we've reduced impediments to understanding, from going to scripto continuant through the catalog of books, and with the book name on the outside of the binder so you can actually read it on the shelf. And now where we are, we're at your computer, you're actually connected to this great mass of organized information. And so we've always used ways to increase our ability to think, to understand, from tools that helped us count beads and add things up, to slide rules, which I miss because there's a real pleasure in feeling those logarithms move around in your hands. And people don't feel that anymore since they punch it in on a calculator. So it's put this set of attractors, this multidimensional set of information, connected, attracting information right into your hand. And it's provided a display that you can sit at. So we come back to Francie again, where she was the CPU. She was the organizer, the central processing unit that accumulated all of that information. And now we've come on up to the web, where all of that information is available to all of the fingertips, all of our fingertips. We can get it anytime we want. So over the years, we've accelerated cognition. It's just faster and faster as to how we think. And now a genuinely new thing, some say akin to the invention of language itself, is that we're partnering our minds with the machines. As you interact in something like ChatGPT, it will learn about you. It will go back and tell you what you forgot. So it's really actually an integration of the mind. And it doesn't matter so much what we're thinking as to how we can guide it. And right now we have agents which build software, which organize information. I've taken the agenda from the SacL5 meetings, and I've taken the transcript and I've said, put this together. And it does. It organizes the whole thing out. And then it's almost grammatically perfect all the time. It'll take out a few things, modify a few things. And then I even asked the agent, give me a docx file so that this will paste perfectly right into our website. And so now we can get all of this information, we can get all of this coordinated information very, very quickly. We're talking weeks to minutes. And so now we understand, but what kind of wisdom are we going to have? And how will we use that speed, especially when we get to the point where you can ask a robot to come to your house and wash your window, or they even say within 10 years, come build me an auxiliary domestic unit. An Amazon truck rolls up, the robots roll out, they put your house up, and you've got it. So that's the trip from scriptio continua, where you couldn't even figure out the words, to now this instant paralleled integrated cognition that we have with machines. So, any questions?
Where do we go from here, Ed?
That was really great, by the way. So, applause.
Thank you.
Chips in our brain. That's where we go next.
Well, Michael said that he was going to do AI after ChatGPT 2 months from now. So we'll see. That's one of the things we can look at.
Right. We will continue this process. And Michael has his hand up. He's following procedure. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
It's easier to follow the procedure, by the way.
It is.
So I think the most important question is your last question. How will you use the speed?
That's right.
Because we used to value productivity so much. And this reminds me a joke about two guys. One of them is using this manual saver, and another is electrical saver, and it spends him a couple of minutes, and then they both come to work and basically are doing the same thing or doing nothing, depending on what kind of work they are doing. So what's the point of this a few minutes gained, or even more than a few minutes? And then in information processing, it's a critical question: what are you doing with this information? So yeah, maybe you found it faster, maybe you found more of this, but you have your some limited abilities to make sense of this information when it comes to you, to making decisions about your life or whatever you need. So I think this whole hype probably would force us to rethink the whole idea of productivity.
We have to rethink it. At work, it's just amazing because what we do at work now is I just say, hey, I need a database. I need database access for this system. Please do it. Boom, creates the database access. And then I say, there's all the passwords. Please use them. And boom, it just does it. So the amount of productivity I get, the thing that holds us up is where's the access? Okay, I can't log into this server, but I need to log into this server. So the ability to build software now and the ability to create semantic searches that let you understand what someone has done. You take a piece of code and you go, what does this do? And it tells you, and it lists it all out. So it's the kind of productivity and the kind of that we see, and it literally changes every week. There's another tool, there's another thing to use like every week, and it just gets faster and faster. I know that in the past, I would have taken weeks to build certain kinds of software, and yet now it's done literally in minutes.
So, keeping in mind that we still have the other half of this meeting to go, let's just limit it to maybe one more question and then move on.
Sure.
So, anybody?
Thanks, Ed. It was excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. So that was really, really good. I loved it.
And
I love the idea that it went from literally no spaces.
Yeah, at 2,000 years to say, geez, spaces would help, 2,000 years.
Kind of took us that long to put wheels on our luggage.
As a species.
Yeah. That's why I like patently obvious. It's an oxymoron. It's obvious when it's obvious.
Okay. So thank you, folks. If you wish to, you can stick around, but we're going to get dry here. We're going to talk about basically Sacramento L5 Society stuff. You're certainly welcome to stick around, but we're going to move on. And again, this is a good beginning, I think, Ed. You've set the bar. You set the bar high here for us. So I do like the idea that we managed to pull this off in about half an hour. So let's keep that format in mind. We want a few minutes for questions afterwards. So whenever you make one of these, try to bring it down as much as you can. And that will give us time to accomplish everything we want to try to do and not stretch our time out.
Right. Yeah. So,
all right. Looking at our agenda.